Good afternoon. Welcome to the Student Faculty Seminar of the Presidential Lecture Series and the Philosophy Forum. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce Jo Throckmorton. He is a filmmaker, a video producer, a director, and an actor. But his being an actor is a joke. But not a joke in the sense that he was a bad actor. He never was an actor. But he's successful and highly regarded film and video maker, and the recipient of many awards. My friend and colleague Rafael Chacon will give you a full account of his accomplishments and background this evening at 8 o'clock in the Montana Theater, when Jo will talk about one of his films, and the title of his talk will be America's Deadliest Battle, an experiential film of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. This afternoon, he will give us a look behind the screen and talk about missing, broken, and forgotten, the never-ending challenges of filmmaking. Please join me in welcoming Jo Throckmorton.
Thank you, Professor Borgman. Everyone can hear me okay? Even in the back up there? Okay. So thank you for that. And yes, thank you for straightening out the situation about being an actor. Never been an actor. So I've taken acting classes, but am not an actor. So thank you for inviting me here today. I'm looking forward to this afternoon and then also this evening. And I appreciate you saying that I had 45 minutes because I thought I only had 30. So because I talk too much and talk too long. So what I'd like to do is just run you through some things. And there was a question that just came up, and I'll just go ahead and answer it. Blue Ace Media and Jo Throckmorton Filmworks are the same company. Jo Throckmorton Filmworks is what I use on a local level for people who know me. So it's just a doing business as or a DBA business. Blue Ace Media is the actual company that I founded in 2006 that I do all my work for. So if there's some confusion about that, I just wanted to straighten that up now. So before we start, I gave the title of this presentation, I think, about 4 months ago. And then in preparing for it over time, I realized that it's kind of a downer. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about all the bad things about filmmaking. So instead, what I'm going to do is blend some of those, one or two of those stories with the idea of telling stories. Because to me, that's the most compelling part of what we're trying to do here. So I believe there are students here. Are there students, actual students that go to class here? Just raise your hand so I have an idea of how many. So 3, 4, 5 or 6? Oh, there's one in the back. Okay. And any of you in media arts, or are you just interested in war or speakers? Visual arts. Okay. Is that a little different than like the old telecommunications? Okay. It's what I think it is. It's the visual arts. Okay. So what I want to try to do is just talk a little bit about making films. I'll just call them films in general. My primary business is actually doing commercials, and that's where I spend almost all of my time. These larger pieces, some that you're going to see here this afternoon, are anomalies. I do them every once in a while. Okay? So with that said, I don't want you to leave later and say, well, I didn't get enough missing things or enough broken things or enough forgotten things. So first of all, I just want to give you a background. City of Hope was my first film that I worked on. It was a feature film. It was directed by John Sayles. John Sayles is a pretty famous independent filmmaker. He made a film called Return of the Secaucus 7, and the Return of the Secaucus 7 is notoriously known as the film that was ripped off by I just blanked on it. The Big Chill, thank you. I kept wanting to say The Big Sleep. The Big Chill. So he came to town in Cincinnati, and I tell the story that I jumped the fence. I broke into a party that they were having as a launch party and tracked down the production manager and handed her my resume, and then she hired me, and then I worked on that for the summer. And then they invited me to go elsewhere to work with them. I ended up going to New York. And in New York, I worked on these two films, Ages and Everything, that's Jonathan Silverman, and we had some other people, like Robert Prosky, and Rita Moreno was in it, and Paul Sorvino from Goodfellas, and his daughter, obviously, Mia Sorvino. So this was a great film that all I remember is Paul Sorvino sitting in the house next door, which was the holding area, and playing their piano and singing very loudly with Rita Moreno. And we couldn't shut them up long enough to get them to come over and do their scene, because that seemed to be the reason they were there on the film. So Ages and Everything was supposed to be a feature film, but it ended up going directly to video cassette. And then Abby, My Love was one of those notorious CBS after-school specials. Do you younger guys know anything about the CBS after-school specials? Do you know anything about that? So they had something like 90 episodes or whatever. And this guy here on the right, do you guys recognize him? You know what he's kind of famous for? Yeah, he got eaten by Hannibal at the end of Silence of the Lambs. He's the guy that got off the airplane and he says, "I'm having an old friend for dinner." So this was kind of my introduction into the film business. I would go pick up Jonathan Silverman at his hotel, and I'd see him every day. So let's talk about very quickly something that was forgotten. So on this film, Jonathan Silverman, signed a low-budget deal, and he was there to do this film. And I was working as essentially an assistant to the second assistant director. And the second assistant director is responsible for assuring that the actors sign in and sign out, and keep track of that for the Screen Actors Guild. All right, so it's all paperwork, right? So he waived his overtime on the first 3 days of work because he was asked, "Will you waive your overtime?" Which was a variety of penalties you get if you work longer than the prescribed period of time, and especially if you work longer than the prescribed period of time without meals, those types of things. So he waived it. We got into the second week. So the 3 days was the start, and then we took time off, and then you come back and start your first full week of production. So towards the end of that second week, I'm driving him back to his hotel. And I'm just one of the PAs and driving along, and he got to be very friendly with me. He would feel free to talk to me, and he says, "It's really odd that they've never asked me to waive my overtime. So it's been all week, and I'm working all these hours, and it's going to be a pretty big charge, and they've never discussed it." So I came back and went immediately to the producer, who I knew, who was a very nice woman, and said, "Were you aware that he just told me this? He just brought it up. I didn't talk to him. He just said it." And so she freaked out and went and essentially chewed out the second assistant director. And so then the second assistant director came to me and said never to talk to the actors again. And if anything else came up, I should tell him so he could cover his rear end, right? So he completely forgot to do his job, just didn't do it. And it could have cost the production a lot of money. But instead, they sent me out to get him some stuff, it was like gifts or whatever, like wine and whatever. They figured if he was drunk, he wouldn't know any better. So we did that, and we were able to work around that issue. So someone forgetting to do what it is they're supposed to do, and this happens a lot actually in the business. So that's a story from here. Really nothing else from these other two. City of Hope was my first exposure to how producers sometimes work. They were all from New York. And somebody forgot to send something for the dolly that was important, obviously, for the job. And I walked into the office while she was on the phone, and the amount of vulgarity that was coming out of her mouth and the level of hatred that was being sent through the phone was insane. She just went on, and I'm sure that the poor fellow at the other end really is probably still recovering today, some 30 years later, I think. But so she does that, and then at the end she stops and gets very calm, and she says, "Now, we need to fix this problem, so what are we going to do to get this resolved?" And it was like turning a light switch. And it taught me a little bit about the film business, which is you can be angry, but at the end of the day, you need to figure out what you're going to do to fix it. Now, I've had to resort personally to yelling and screaming sometimes, because sometimes that's the only way you can get someone's attention. But at the end of it, you need to back off and realize that this is a collaborative experience. As a matter of fact, on Saturday just this past Saturday, I was in Champaign, Illinois, for the University of Illinois film that I'm working on, and the creative director has gone on for about 2 months about 3 shots that were going to be part of an opening sequence, and went on and on about it. And I scheduled those shots to be shot at certain times, and he was bent out of shape because he felt that they were the wrong times. So he proceeded to, harass the entire production for weeks about how I was having people show up at the wrong time, and it wasn't going to work because it had to be done at twilight, it had to be done in the evening right before sunset, and this was a big mistake, and you guys don't know what you're doing. And he spelled out we need to shoot between 7 and 7:30. And this past Saturday, we filmed between 6:25 and 7 p.m. as I had scheduled, and it was perfect. Everyone was gone by 7:10. If we had waited for his window, it would have been too dark and we would never have gotten the shot. All right, so his level of, it was a level of meanness, but you'll find that sometimes. It was just, everyone else is wrong, I'm right. Everyone else is wrong, I'm right, and it just beat you and beat you and beat you. But you have to actually step back and separate two things, which is the personal from the professional. And I said all along, you can disagree with my professional opinions. You may say I need to be there at this time. I have no problem with you saying we need to be there at 7 instead of 6. But what I have a problem with is if you start criticizing the people and saying that they don't know what they're doing and they're idiots, so much for them doing their job. There's no place for that in the business because it doesn't accomplish anything. All it does is slow you down and create bad feelings. And by George, you'll find out in 6 weeks you're working with that person again and it's uncomfortable. I worked for a film in a small town called Oxford, Ohio, which is where Miami University is. These guys were graduates, they came back. They essentially had a burnt earth, kind of scorched earth philosophy. They came in and they stole things from one location and used them in another, and they never made their way back. They lied to people about how long things were going to be closed. They essentially almost boarded up a business who had agreed to let them put scaffolding up so that the business couldn't even operate, even though they had been given assurances. So thing after thing after thing. And so this was the film that I'm telling you about is called A Reason to Believe, and it was the only film I ever quit because the experience was so bad. Because they didn't do things that they promised and not realize that the people that were working on that film lived in that town. And when they were done and left, we'd still be there. So you can't treat people in the community that way. Okay, if you're going to do something, you need to do what it is you promise. So that experience was so bad that I actually had a thought form in my own head that's always, it's the undoing of many filmmakers. And I said, how hard could it be? So I said, how hard could it be? I'll go make my own. All right, well, it's kind of hard. So we went off and took Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians. You guys familiar with that one? 10 Little Indians movie. It's an old Agatha Christie movie. It's a book. And it's about 10 people that are at a remote, like a manor house, like in England or something, and they all die one by one. We couldn't afford 10, so we only had 6 little Indians. So we had 6 people. And it's the standard twist. One of them you think has been killed, but it's not killed. They're killed in order to bring out the villain, at the very end, and then they reappear and they subdue the villain and the film is over. So we had 6 little Indians, and we went to a small little A-frame winter chalet in the Poconos and had great conditions. It was completely snowed in, looked beautiful. Went in there and started to shoot. We had 12 days to do a 100-page script, which is pretty hard. It's 12 pages a day, which is about triple of what you would do on a regular feature film, and it's about double what you would do on a standard low-budget film. So we did 12 pages a day, and on the second day it started to rain. Okay, so the first day into night we had a frozen pond, which we needed. We had snow and all of this. The second day it started to rain. And it rained and all of the snow was gone for the remainder of the shoot until the last day. So we had to essentially figure out how do you reconfigure what we're shooting in order to create a film based on what it is we said, which was it was going to be snowed in. And then we fortunately had a huge snowstorm on the night before our last day, and we were able then to rush through and get all of the outdoor scenes we needed. But we rewrote a lot of stuff that went from outside to inside and that type of thing. So those are some of the challenges. It's not really missing, lost, or forgotten, but it happens. Just really quickly, after I was doing these film productions, I actually had worked with Time Warner to do a lot of television programming for the city of Cincinnati. So I was doing about 40 hours of new programming a month, which was a lot. That was a lot a week to produce. Some of it was sports related, thank goodness. So it was live, switched to tape, so you didn't spend a lot of time editing. Ended up working at what it was CBS TV in Cincinnati, Channel 9, which is now the ABC affiliate. I worked there for a year. It was the best job I ever had in terms of being on a payroll. So I was the director, sit in the chair and make the decisions about what you see when you see it, those types of things. And it was a lot of fun. I was on the chair when Oklahoma City had the bombing. So I was the first director on air. And we were on air for a long time that day, obviously. But it was the idea of how it's a very thrilling and interesting and adrenaline-filled job. And I loved it. All right. I eventually had to stop because I moved to Bloomington, Indiana, because I decided I wanted to be with my spouse. So I figured that would be more fun than just the job. But very quickly about WCPO, you're talking about the challenges. It was a union shop. I was non-union. All of the people who work for me were union. You fill out discrepancy reports after every production. Like anything you did wrong from what was scripted, you had to explain what it was so that you could file it with the FCC. So it's all just standard paperwork. We had a union chief who decided on the weekends he was going to start rotating some of the crews so they'd all learn different positions, but they were going to be trained. So the first weekend of this experiment, I'm the first director on, and I'm calling a shot, and I look down and I see the person who's responsible for switching the show, who's supposed to say, this is live, this is live. So I say, ready to take one, ready to take two, take two. Every time I would say, take, I'd see his hand go back and forth like this. And I'd say, okay, never mind, just stay on two. And then he would hit one, because he was working on it. I'm going to get one, I'm going to get one. I'd say, no, it's too late now, just stay on two, and then he hit one. And so I spent the first part of 1 half-hour program where he was always one shot behind. So I had a person that was on remote out in the field, and I had someone that was in the studio, and they were talking to each other. So every time the person in the field was talking, we saw the person in the studio. Every time the studio person was talking, we saw that. So the first break that came up, first commercial break, the phone explodes. They hand me the phone, and my boss is screaming at me like I don't know what I'm doing. I said, you might want to come in, we'll talk. I've got to go, hang up. We get through the rest of the cast, and the union chief comes in, and he says it was all my fault. And this was after I have embedded on tape, because I would always record my shows, them saying, I messed that up, I'm sorry, I didn't know what I was doing, because I haven't done this for 6 months. So those types of things happen. And it's, those are some of the challenges you'll face in the industry. You just have to believe in yourself, and you have to do what you think that you know is right for your job. And then at the same time, you don't need to hang someone out to dry. You know, my point was, you made a mistake, the guy made a mistake, it's not a big deal. You know, let's not freak out about this. But some people don't feel that way in the business. And then I also did some work for PBS. Both in Dayton, Cincinnati, and then I still do a lot of work for PBS in Bloomington, Indiana. Worked for a company in Indianapolis for 10 years, and I tell people it was the worst 10 years of my life. I hated almost every moment I was there because it was very corporate, not a lot of fun. The people didn't really care about what they were doing, so it was just a really bad, so you'll get into those situations, and you just have to make up your mind about whether you want to stay there and work through it and do the best work you can and then move on, which is what I try to do. So I eventually ended up running the company, and over the course of time, you know, we had a lot of departures as people realized that maybe they weren't that invested in what it is that we were trying to do. So I also saw my job in that case as helping people understand what it is they really wanted to do. Do you really want to be here, or are you just here for a job? And for me, I would really push on the people I work with, and everything I still do is, if you really like what you're doing and you want to be here, then I want you here. But if you're only doing this because a spouse thinks you should be doing it, or because you think that this is somehow the perception of what you should be doing but you're not happy, it doesn't make any difference. And I had a gentleman on my staff who was an incredible model maker. He could make the most insane models of products that we were trying to launch for a company. And I had said to him repeatedly, you should do this all the time. I mean, you would make so much money because it's not easy to do this. But he was like, no, my wife thinks that I should be a producer. All right. Well, after so many problems that we'd had with him where we called him in and said, you know, you're not getting this done, you're not getting this done, or whatever, he got upset and he quit. And I told Raphael this last night, I think it was. He walks into my office, he has a stack of project files, and he dumps them on my desk. He goes, I quit. And I looked at him, I said, well, you know, most people give you 2 weeks notice, you know. So, I mean, I don't know why you've given me your project folders. We need to get everything done. He's like, no, I quit now. I said, okay, I tell you what, why don't you come tomorrow, we'll go through your exit process and this whole thing. So he comes back the next day, and he sits down with me and the owner of the company. So I was the vice president and then the president. And he sits down, the first thing he says is, well, you know, my wife really thinks that I should come back in here and ask for my job back. And before he could say anything else, the president leans forward and says, well, I'm really glad you're not listening to your wife's advice. And cut him off, and that was his last day there. And it was because, and the reality is, after he left, he was never happier. And so sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind, if I can use that song title, because it does make a difference. If you see in a colleague someone that's not happy, all it's going to do is make everyone else not happy. And you really need to love what you're doing, or it's just completely not worth it. So that's the kind of the lesson from there. Then I left, and here's what I was talking about, a Blue Waste Media company. So I left and created my own company in 2006, where I hired no employees, everyone's contractors. So if I'm working on a job and I need a really good animator, so I hired a Disney animator for a series of TV commercials for a new wine. And they were brilliant, but I couldn't have him on staff all the time because I don't have animation to do all the time. All right, and he can get work with other people where he gets paid a really good rate for working a very little amount of time. So that's the beauty of the freelance world, and so we use contractors in everything we do. Then at about 2014, I went into the Directors Guild of America. I was, maybe it was 2012, I can't remember exactly the year. I had worked as an assistant director for about 12 or 15 years, and to get into the DGA, I had to send them every call sheet from every production I'd ever worked on, with pay stubs to prove that I didn't just create, you know, the call sheets. So you send in a book that's this thick, and then they say, okay, you're eligible to go into the union. You're not in the union, but you're eligible, all right? So at that time, the reason I decided to make the decision is I was working on 2 episodes of Parks and Recreation. Do you guys know that show? Parks and Rec, okay. So I worked on 2 episodes of that, and the assistant directors, because there's a group of us, they were all very kind. You have to get someone from the industry to sign endorse you and say, this person should be in the union. So not only do you pay for it and have other paperwork, you have to get 4 signatures from, and so I called one of them and I said, you know, I'm getting ready to do this, I need to get some signatures. She goes, just send me the page, you'll have 4 signatures in 25 minutes. And so she sends it back, I send it in, just because of having that relationship. So if you go and do good work, people recognize it and people help you. And so I was certainly helped to get into the union officially at that point. So that's what kind of got me into it, and I've stayed in it ever since, and primarily, again, work in commercials, although next fall I'll be doing another feature with the gentleman who wrote Hoosiers, that movie. So he wrote Hoosiers, and last year he did a film called My All-American about a University of Texas football player. So he's written a new movie, and I'm going to produce it and assistant direct it, and he'll be the director. So that's kind of the background there, and I was lucky enough to work on a Dick's Sporting Goods commercial that was nominated, and it was with the DGA Awards, if you're nominated, you get free invitation to go into the award ceremony. And I had just been there 2 weeks before to finish some safety training, so I didn't go back. And it was the year that, like, Clint Eastwood was there and a bunch of other, like, really big, the guy that did Birdman, and all these guys were all there, and like an idiot, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna go. And I should have gone, because I would have been sitting at the table next to them. So that was kind of stupid. But at any rate, I was very lucky. I was one of many assistant directors that worked on that production. And everything that we shot was thrown away because they did not get the proper releases. They were forgotten. They forgot to get permission from high schools, from coaches, from intercollegiate athletic associations. And so because we spent days shooting all of this, every bit of it had to be thrown away, and it was impermissible to be used because they could not get the clearances. So there's another example of something that was forgotten. This is, I'll just show you this piece and we'll talk about it.
And this is, you know, the Wild West, the last of the Old West out here.
It's vast, it's huge, it's expansive. Pasture land, a lot of cattle and ranchers.
Just beautiful country as far as I'm concerned.
In a sense, it was the perfect place to hide nuclear weapons. The reason it was positioned in the middle of no place was because they were targeted.
1,000 missiles deployed underground, constantly on alarm.
United States and the Soviet Union competing for the domination of the world.
It was a system for which there was no defense. For a war, no one could win.
So that was a trailer that we put together just to help kind of tease this program. The parks, the United States Park System put in a new national park, and they put it in South Dakota, where there's still some old silos from the Minuteman I program, and the Minuteman I program was disbanded through the SALT Treaty. So there's still the actual silo there. It has to remain open so that the Soviets can fly over it and see that it's, what's inside. So it's always open, covered with acrylic, panes of glass. But this is an example that moves you into some of the other work I've done. This is the type of stuff that I would call exhibition style, okay? It's a pseudo-documentary. People come in. The person that you saw on there was Nikita Khrushchev's son, who actually lives in Boston. So he was interviewed and could speak, as kind of, a second hand. I mean, it was his father, so he kind of knew what was going on. So, and then there were other people like Donald Rumsfeld and others in the government, the U.S. government, as well as others. But everything that you saw there we shot, except for, obviously, the archival footage from TV. But we were in the silos. We were in the actual capsules that the soldiers would go down into and spend 24-hour shifts, and these young kids of 20, 21 years old were responsible for 10 nuclear weapons. And they showed us how the entire system worked and where they would be. And one of the stories that was told to us is the gentleman that was kind of walking towards screen in the blue uniform. He was a maintenance person, and he was representing an actual person from 1979, I believe it was, who was in the silo when the alarm sounded, and he got the call from the capsule where the two Minuteman operators were, and they said, "You need to evacuate, we're going to launch." So it was essentially, he was given about 10 minutes of warning that we were about to commence into World War III. So it was real, it wasn't a drill. So they leave the thing, and their instructions at that time were you get in the truck, if you're on site, and you drive about a mile away, stop the truck, get out, and you look back at the facility and make sure that the missile goes away and make sure that it flies. And then, if you're lucky, there'll be nothing else that happens. But most likely what would happen is they would see a bright light because that area was targeted. So they fully expected to actually be dead within about 15 minutes. And it was very real for this gentleman. We went back there to do our filming, and he's still alive, and he was one of our advisors. And we went to the actual location, which has since been imploded, but the actual location still had the fence work where he had been given the warning. And we saw him walk in ahead of us. We gave him time on his own, and he was in tears. Here's a military man, and he was in tears because of how close he was to being dead, in his opinion, based on that. And it was an administrative error of some kind that caused that alarm to go out. And it was caught at the last minute. It was one of like 3 major errors that occurred in the 70s. Another one, the Soviets saw our missile silos, and there was a cloud system over the top of it, and they saw what they believed to be missile launches, plumes, and it turns out they were thunderheads. But the satellites at that time couldn't see the difference. So they actually spooled up all of their nuclear weapons to let them fly, and a colonel at a lower level in the Soviet Army refused to actually execute the command, despite being told directly by his superiors that he needed to launch the missiles. And he did it because he felt very strongly that it didn't make sense. He was looking at all the documentation that it was coming in immediately, and he's like, there's no heightened level of tension between us. There's no reason for this to occur. This doesn't make sense. So he was well below that level of making that decision, but he made that decision, and it averted a missile strike on the United States in 1979. So it's pretty emotional stuff of what they did, and most of those stories are just now coming to light because those programs are over. But we still have, you saw one of the images there was a missile silo that we shot in Nebraska, so there's still plenty of missile silos out there. So this is still going on today. So that was really interesting, and I didn't know anything about Cold War Minuteman missile, but when you get hired to do a job, you learn a lot about it very quickly. And that was certainly fun. It was very interesting, and it was probably one of the first pieces being made about this portion of the Cold War, because it was a brand new national park. So that's one thing. I'm going to show you something called Seeing the Elephant, and it's another teaser, and it was done for the Kenosha Civil War Museum in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and it was shot in 360 degrees. So the camera, in this case, would be placed in the middle of this room, and the entire battle that we were filming would take place around it. And I moved the camera across the field over various times, and we redid the battle about 10 or 15 times. And then we would stitch all those together so that people could see how this would occur. But this is the flat screen version of it, just for your edification.
Everyone says war, war, war. I'm going because I want to see the sunny south. No one has the right to fire on our country's flag.
People accuse me of being an abolitionist. I firmly believe that a man's energy and ability, not skin color, defines his worth. If that makes me an abolitionist, so be it.
My dear, don't worry. I will be home soon. But we must first rid this nation of the terrible curse of secession. Pray for us and be brave.
So again, that's just a snippet, but what that was is it was about, I think we had somewhere between 150 and 250 reenactors, and we sprinkle in real actors in with them, and they're the ones that were doing the parts. It was meant, again, this is common for these types of films. They're composited. So what you're trying to do in that case was show the Wisconsin involvement in the war, and they weren't picking any one particular person. However, some of the writings, or all of the writings that you heard spoken, actually did come from a real person. But we weren't trying to recreate a certain battle, or we weren't trying to demonstrate what happened to this one particular soldier. Of the ones you saw, the only one that died was the nicely dressed guy with the hat who kissed his wife's hand goodbye. He died in real life, but we used his writings. But all of them we tried to represent so that when people would come to this museum, which was a larger piece, much like what you're doing here, it's a larger idea. That film was designed to help spur people down that road of thinking about what was it like, what did they experience. And the reality was that many of the Wisconsinites who went because they thought this is going to be a great adventure. And for some reason they thought war was something worth seeing, and that's what they call seeing the elephant. That's where the term comes from. So they went to see the elephant. And then, of course, they all find, well, almost nearly all of them find as soon as they're there that it's not what was thought. In every war, it's that way. So that's what that particular piece was. I'm going to run through a couple things here real quick. I work as an adjunct faculty at IU. So what I try to do is take the experiences I have on set and bring them back for the students to use. So we have a couple of studios there, and the one on the left, we're teaching them how to light with commercial techniques, as opposed to what normally happens in colleges, which is 3 lights are thrown out and they say do 3-point lighting. And we don't do that. We've never really done that. It's kind of a fallacy. So we teach them a lot about how to do bounce lighting and how to do spread lighting and how to do back cross keys and how to do overhead ambient lights and things like that. So that's what we're doing here. And in this case here, one of the classes did a 15-minute piece about being a student at IU. And they would do things where they would secure locations throughout town and go out and shoot. And in this case, and I don't know what, if any, equipment you have here, but they were using Canon C300s. They have some Sony F7s, which are, they are of a grade that you can do professional commercial production with it. Did I see you do? Okay. So those are professional cameras and the students use them. There's an actor named Robbie Benson, who a lot of you don't know, but he was from the 70s. He was very dreamy. He had beautiful blue eyes and all the women loved him, and many of the men wish they were him, okay? You know, okay. He actually worked at IU for a number of years, and he's the one that purchased. He acquired the gifts in order to purchase most of that equipment. So most of the equipment there was of industry standard as of 3 or 4 years ago. So we did that. Also, they do live TV productions. So on the left is an older version, on the right's an older version, and then just last year they built a brand new studio that was designed by a gentleman who directs for CBS, who's on staff and who's a faculty member at IU, and he does all the Major League Baseball. He's done like, I think, 6 Olympics and things like that. So he helped design the studio space, and this was the last group I had. So we also do those types of things. And I'm going to show you a commercial that the students did right here.
There are moments in life when you have to be in the zone and take care of your finances.
Hey, honey, did you pay the electric bill?
Yes, dear. For those moments, the First Savings Bank mobile app and online banking can help. Take care. First Savings Bank gives you the flexibility to do your banking wherever, whenever. Ready to get into the game? Switch to First Savings Bank.
So what happened is we had the First Savings Bank, which was near Louisville, Kentucky, and we're in Bloomington, which is about 2 hours away. They contacted us and said they want to do a competition. They wanted these students to go out, 10 of them, all on their own and create a commercial and then submit that finished commercial, and then they would pick one and they would show it as their commercial for the games because they were advertising on the games. And I said, and a request came to me, as well as a few other professors. The other professors ignored it. And I sent a note back to them and said, we'll do this, but we're not doing it that way because that's unfair to students. You're asking them to give you all that time and you're not going to pay them anything, and that's not going to happen with, in my class. So I countered and said, what you will do is you will pay the person who comes up with the idea that you select $1,000 in scholarship, and then you'll take the rest of that money and you'll split it among all the other students who work on the commercial for you. But you will decide before we do anything as to which commercial you're going to do. And so we submitted some ideas, and this was the winning idea. It's really basic, straightforward. It's exactly what I preach in class, which is you sell the product. The product is simple, it's direct, you've got an online app and you can pay bills and not have to worry. All right, it's really, really easy to do, to focus on that. But the students came up with the creative, they did the casting, they had the person who wrote it also directed it. We had 4 people that rotated as assistant directors. They all took different scenes that they would assistant direct. We rotated a couple other people. We had a camera department with a director of photography, with a first AC, a second AC. So they all assumed actual positions, and they ran it themselves. And the advertising agency for whom this commercial was made, the First Savings Bank was their commercial, the advertising executive creative director came and supervised the shoot, and at the end of the shoot he talked to them for about an hour about the business and what he thought they did well, what they didn't do so well on the production. They also did the editing and everything. So the entire project was done by them, and they ended up getting some small amount in payment, but it allowed them to say this was our project, and all we did was supervise it. This is another one that students participated in. They did not write it.
From Memorial Stadium on the IU campus, this is Indiana University football. It's another great day for Big Ten action here in Bloomington. As the kickoff approaches, you can just feel the excitement building. Down the 5, and into the end zone, touchdown! Here comes a blitz, they got him. He's got a hole. 40, 45, 50, one man to beat. Is he going to do it? Unbelievable touchdown!
So I want to tell you a couple things. So this was primarily a student-produced piece. Okay, I was the producer and I was the director. I wrote the scenes other than the football sequences. But when we did each one of those scenes, again, we had a rotation of students that each were responsible for directing that scene based on what I told them. So I would say, here's what's going to happen, here's the primary action, I want to see you set it up so that it looks real. So they were the ones that set up the kid with the hot dog, they're the ones that set up the person, the guys outside with the tent getting ready, doing some tailgating. And I'm going to show this to you again if I can figure out how to do that. We're going to show it again, and I want you to see that the shot where the kids are getting out of the car and running towards the stadium and the plaza is filled with people, there were about 6 people on the plaza. Another student composited everything else you see there on his own. He went out to a farm, big piece of grass, and he put people all over the place, and then he pulled the grass out and placed them into the scene. And he even put a blimp in if you look closely enough. And at the end, on this scene here, he enhanced all of this. None of those fireworks existed. And also the 3 jets that fly over did not exist. They were the J-35 new fighter jets. They were prototypes that hadn't yet been released. They never flew over the stadium, but he selected those as the jets he was going to have fly over the stadium, and so that was all posted. So that was all done by students. So I'm going to try to show this again and see. I don't want to see that one. I want to see the next one.
From Memorial Stadium on the IU campus, this is Indiana University football. It's another great day for Big Ten action here in Bloomington. As the kickoff approaches, you can just feel the excitement building.
So I thought, that was actually some fine work by the students. They did a great job. I'm going to show you, okay, so now I'm going to do a couple things I did. This is kind of the other point of this little talk is it's about telling the story. It's about selling the product. It's about talking about what it is that makes it great, okay? So before you look at this one, I did another commercial where someone loved their forklift so much that they drove it home from work. They loved it. So we showed it coming down a residential street. It comes up onto the sidewalk, into their driveway, and at the end of the spot, he walks back out and he opens the garage door and there's like 10 other forklifts in his garage because he loves the product so much. So they liked that commercial and they said, can you do another one? These were regional commercials that were done. They were tagged locally by the local, it's like car commercials. So this was for industrial equipment and this is what it looked like.
The 8 Series from Toyota. Productive, durable, ergonomic. You won't want to leave it at work.
So the interesting part about that, again, it kind of goes along with what we're talking about here, is that was shot at the Ruth's Chris restaurant in Orange County, California, right across from the headquarters for Toyota. And I had worked for weeks to get permission to use that, and the owners of the restaurant were on leased property, but they said, well, you can absolutely use our restaurant. And we got permission for that, and it's all signed, and then we went to the lease owners of the parking lot because we had to have permission to shoot, to actually be standing on the parking lot with our cameras and shoot back towards the restaurant. And we had these visions of that scene where you'd see Ruth's Chris, and you'd see the restaurant, and you'd see the thing come up, and we had everything in place, but a gentleman decided on the last day that we didn't have enough insurance. We raised the insurance, and then he decided he wanted to go to dinner and not finish the deal. So he just left, and he said, it's too late. I don't want to deal with it. So I showed up to the location. Actually, it was later that night, because that's when we were shooting, and was proceeded to be accosted by one of his people saying how I couldn't shoot there. And I went round and round with this guy, and actually it was one of the times where I screamed and said, get off my set, you can't be here, I have permission to do this, and he said he was going to call the police, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? He said, well, they won't let you shoot here anymore. You won't be able to shoot in Orange County. I said, I can live with that. Go ahead and call them. I don't care. So in the process, we worked with the manager of the restaurant, who was very much for us doing this, and decided we'd flip everything. And we shoot from inside looking out, which this guy couldn't do anything. So at that point, when we made the decision that there was nothing about what we were going to do that was going to violate the lease arrangement, then all of us started screaming at the guy and told him to get out of there. We used very colorful language, and it was fun. And then nothing ever happened. You know, we did the spot, and they were quite happy with it. Okay. I'm going to show you, the client was very happy with it. I'm going to show you a couple things I do for IU. These are unique in our opinion of what is done in order to promote a university. It's the idea of talking about why a university is important to a single person who came there and what the outcome was. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not this one, sorry.
It's still sunny out here. Cool down, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so I was wrong. That was a filler piece for the that I wanted to show you because it was unusual from what we do. It's probably closer to the visual arts stuff that you might be interested in. This was done as a very quick thing where a client from the university came to me and said, I want to do something that looks like this, and they showed me a George Michael music video. He said, I love this effect. I'm like, okay. And so she said, can we do anything like that to promote during the summertime? There's 113 days where they do various arts, and they put these out on cable and promoted it. So I had to, first of all, I had to watch the George Michael music video a number of times to figure out what he was doing. And that's where we ended up doing the big color wash that was all done with a large projector that we brought in from Chicago. We projected stuff onto their bodies, so they all had to wear certain clothing and those sorts of things. So that was really just designed to show you, just kind of a different way to go about promoting something. This actually is, this is for before I get to the others, this is for a campaign we did for the NCAA.
Let me get this straight. The big trout then screamed at you, and the horse you rode in on. Well, that was inappropriate behavior. And then the cowboy made a comment about you and a side of rice pilaf. Bring it in.
College athletics has many traditions, but bad sportsmanship isn't one of them. Respect, it's the name of the game.
So we did that piece, and then we did this one. It was a companion piece.
It's payback time.
You think that's funny? Are you even watching the same thing I am?
Does that bother you? Does that bother you? Does that bother you? It's not so fun when you're the target of rude behavior. College athletics has many traditions, but bad sportsmanship isn't one of them. Respect, it's the name of the game.
So again, we don't know really how we got those campaigns, but we wrote those and pitched them, and they liked them, and those ran for about a year across the country. But again, it's a situation where you're selling, you're kind of selling the very clear idea, selling the product, which is don't do these types of things, okay? Now I'm going to show you the IU commercials. This is about Mark Cuban. You guys know Mark Cuban? All right. This is what he did in college.
Just long enough to wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Indiana University.
So what you heard there was the master recording before we re-recorded it. We were required to re-record the song, so I left the good one in because I figured you'd appreciate his version more than the new version, which was actually quite good. So that was an example of, we did a campaign of 5 commercials that were like that. That was the longer version, the director's cut for a minute, that showed his experience. He did all kinds of crazy things, and we did our best to try to communicate that it's sometimes a little bit more than just about what happens in the classroom. It's about what you do outside the classroom as well. That last scene with the basketball crew, there were probably about 20 people in the stands. Everyone else was composited in later, and there was no Bobby Knight. We had a guy that walked through that looked like Bobby Knight, for those who know Bobby Knight. So we did that one, and then that was our third, and I think it was our second or third one. This one I'm going to show you is our first one, which is a lovely little piece.
Indiana University.
So that was actually all of ours. It was the first one, was our favorite one that we did. The aria was written by an IU grad student, and it was recorded by both the woman that you saw in the spot, the young woman who's in opera, who just happens to look exactly like Eileen Perez did at that time. And then the other part was recorded by Eileen while she was in Europe. And then if you heard in the middle, you'd hear kind of a vocal quality change. That represented the growth and development of Eileen. And you blend from the younger person playing her to her. So that's another subliminal piece of advertising we're putting in there. Now this was particularly interesting. One part we had to shoot about a year later because we had trouble with her ending line. So we had to fly her back from Germany in the middle of a snowstorm, and there was this whole long story of how she was in Atlanta. We needed to get her to, well, she was in Chattanooga, and we needed to get her from Chattanooga to Bloomington, and it snowed, and her flight was canceled. We had to put her on a bus at 11 p.m. that night. She took the bus to another airport, got on that flight, flew up, and made it in time for us to, she made it there about 2 hours before her scene was shot. But we did all of the stuff we had to redo the whole thing on the stage with the opera, everything. That was all faked. We had to open the university over the break, bring in all of that, and reset the stage and bring in a lot of people. So it was a lot of fun. I love spending money, and it looked good, you know, spending that kind of money. I'm going to show you just a couple more things. These are some pieces of my work as assistant director. This one is one of my favorite little pieces. It's for Axe Apollo body spray.
They're neck and neck into the final lap. I can't believe it. For the third time in his career, Dario Franchi will win the Indianapolis 5. Whoa, hold on. Is that what I think it is? It is. There is an astronaut on the track. You gotta be kidding me. I've said it once and I will say it again, folks. Nothing beats an astronaut. Look for specially marked packages of Axe Apollo at Target for your chance to win a trip to space.
So I show you that because I really like the spot. I think it's very funny. I don't think it's particularly good at selling the product necessarily, but that's kind of what Axe does. So I showed you that because it was a lot of fun. We did it in a course of a day. And the idea of them pouring the milk on them at the end was completely spontaneous. They decided to do both the kissing of the bricks and that at the last minute. They're like, oh, this would be funny. And I just love the line, nothing beats an astronaut. So I wanted to show you that because I thought it was fun. This one is piece. This is a little bit longer. This is a really extensive piece that was shot over 12 days. So they shot this longer piece in the same amount of time I shot my first feature film, 12 days. And we were all over the place, and they did it in Indianapolis because of the Super Bowl that year was in Indianapolis. But so it's a little bit longer, but I think you'll like the story arc, and then I'll show you one more piece. We'll be done.
Once upon a time,
Hey man, what's up? Hey man, what's up?
a man called Ned
3 grams of fiber.
bought some necessities.
Yeah, much money. Right, this is all for you today.
And what was supposed to be an everyday purchase
Yeah, that'll do it. Just swipe right there on the swipe reader.
suddenly turned into something very special.
Have a good one. Hello?
10 Super Bowl tickets. You won. For 10 special friends.
Yeah, me mom. What? Super Bowl.
Needless to say, there was an abundance of happiness. Especially from the knuckleheads at the car wash.
Are those Super Bowl tickets?
Yes, dude! You're going to the Super Bowl!
And as joy fell on so many, humiliation was brought to one.
So you just wear this, you get the ticket. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it.
Meanwhile,
It's called the Super Bowl?
Carl, I found a pancake supplier.
Remember me?
It's worse.
and the last,
Go get her, Ned!
most important ticket of all was given to Carly from accounts receivable. Indianapolis, baby. Indianapolis, indeed.
Is this Indianapolis?
A tale that ended with Ned and 10 friends at the Super Bowl. The most epic day in America.
So a little bit more interesting, a little bit longer, and it was a fun little piece. I show that to a lot of people because I think it's, it's just a demonstration of what you can do, especially with money, but it was also a really well-written story. A couple of things about that is my first day on set as one of the assistant directors was that last scene where we were shooting in Lucas Oil Stadium, and essentially I was told you've got, I think it was 250 extras over there, get them ready to go into the scene, running through wardrobe, get them divided, make sure they're okay. And so that was the first thing I did. And then right after that, they took me downstairs because one of the other assistant directors had to leave to do something and the other assistant director wasn't available. So I was the third one on call. So within about 30 minutes of being on set my first day, I was actually standing next to camera calling the rolls for the scene where the kid was jumping on the bed with the burgers. So it was an interesting experience because, I didn't know anybody that was there, but there's a process, there's a thing that you do. So knowing your business, knowing your job, it allows you to work as kind of interchangeable parts if you do it really well. The first AD on this job, however, was crazy. He was a crazy Englishman, and both me and the other assistant director it was difficult to work for him. He would spill out about 5 things that you're supposed to do. You're going to do this, 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 and this. Right after we do this next thing. And then we do the next thing, and then he'd come back and he'd say, now you're going to do this, this, and this, and this. And it was completely different than the 5 things he gave you before the shot. And then he would want to know why it wasn't already done. So it was kind of difficult. The last thing I'm going to show you is my all-time favorite commercial I've ever worked on. Shockingly enough, it was for the World Wrestling Federation. All right, and I just loved it. I show this to a lot of people because I think it is the epitome of actors who know what they're doing and a great story. In the desert, we shot it in a parking lot in Dayton, Ohio. So the reason I wanted to leave on that is to kind of circle back to my other point of this was, yeah, a lot of things go wrong, some things are difficult. But this job, when I went in to do this job, I was the assistant director on this, so I pretty much directed all these guys. There's certain rules about who can and can't talk to actors. I was the one that was able to talk to the actors. So I didn't go into that job really expecting anything. It's like, I'm working with a bunch of wrestlers, right? They were the best group of actors I've ever worked with. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew their lines. They knew how to play the camera. If you asked them to try something, they did it. We had each one of them for about 20 to 25 minutes. We moved through those spaces. We had Vince for about a half hour or whatever. That last shot where he was doing the glove, it kept breaking because he was so strong, he'd pull it and his fingers would poke through. So we had to figure out all these different ways to do it so that that didn't happen. And I'm standing just off of camera here next to his interpreter, who's next to me, and I would say, he needs to do such and such, and then he would whisper over to the guy who only spoke, I think it's Punjabi, I think is the language. He only spoke, spoke that. So we were doing that back and forth. It was just an incredible blast to do. And then when I saw the commercial assembled, it's like, this is insanely good. Like, I couldn't believe it. So I show that because it tells the story. It's a simple game of telephone, but it tells the story that it moves to 8. And you are reminded of that constantly because of the idea of they're getting it wrong. All right, so that to me is, if you're going to be in the business, if you're going to strive to do something in the business, you should really work really hard about the story. The story will always overcome the production. If you've ever seen the Blair Witch Project, the original, it's a horrible film, just terribly made. But the story holds together so well that you'll watch it. But I physically became a little sick watching it because of the camera work. It was so bad. However, you would watch the whole thing because it had the essential element of what's next. So this commercial is a representation of when you would hear him say, we're at 8, and then you'd hear the next guy be wrong, you would say, well, what's next? And then you'd hear the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So if you can think about that when you're selling your product, or you're selling your film, your narrative, or whatever, if people are always asking what happens next, then you've overcome your major obstacle. So that's all I have. We can do questions. Is that right? You.
I have a question about releases. You talked a little bit about in the very beginning when there was the problem with schools and they didn't have enough releases.
Yeah, Dick's. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering about the type of releases that you have to get for a public arena versus something you're filming in a private place.
Most tickets, like if you go to a football game here, actually, for the university, there should be a disclaimer printed on the back that you could be photographed for promotional purposes and uses. So a lot of places will imprint that on tickets. So when you buy the ticket, you're implying that you agree with the policy. We also, when I do my work, I always post the sign, the legal sign. Photography and videography are taking place in this area if you do not want to be a part of that. And it's going to be used for this purpose. If you don't want to do that, you need to not go into this area. Going into this area gives us permission. All right, well, that's a nebulous legal area. It typically is never challenged. Typically what would happen is if someone really complained a lot, they would just blur them. I was just doing, today I was supposed to be working on a commercial with Chris Collinsworth from the Bengals, but I had already committed to this job, which I prefer to be here. But Chris is great, but he's with the Bengals, and we did a commercial a couple weeks ago for the Bengals where we filmed at a tailgate party. And that tailgate party had 150 people there. None of them professional actors. They were all just citizens. And well, we needed to get releases for every one of them, and we needed to get photographs of every one of them holding their release with a number on it so that they could match the number to the release to the face. So if there were ever any legal challenges, they could pull that paperwork. So that was that particular project. And on nearly every project we do, we get a release from anyone that we hire, and we get a photo of them, and we marry that to the release, through coding. And then that's the thing that protects us from any future problems. But there's different ways to do it, and one of those is certainly you can put up a thing. We owned Lucas Oil Stadium when we did that. Those were all our actors. So every one of them had already gone through previously, I believe during the casting process, assigning away their rights. Okay? But if you're doing some of these public things, they're very difficult to do, and sometimes you have to rely on signage. Okay. Somebody back here had a yes.
Throughout your presentation, I've been thinking about Albert J. Lasker, the early 20th century father of modern advertising, and also about Hans Packard in his classic book about advertising, The Hidden Persuaders. Both of those men thought that advertising was 95% about human psychology, how to approach it, how to manipulate it. And I wonder, which psychological ideas and assumptions do you bring to your commercial work?
Well, I'm familiar with those guys. I'm trying to remember which one who wrote the like 15 reasons for why you should buy a particular car. I forget his name. Certainly big. And then there was a guy from Leo Burnett who came up with the 12 types of commercials in the industry, where he analyzed for years all these different commercials and determined there were only 12 kinds. And everything was a derivative of that. So those are the types of things that we dabble in when we do research, on what we're going to do. But the way that I approach it is that I don't really go into it and try to, I find it very difficult to try to overcome the psychological ideas of what people want. It's very difficult. Now, I've read the book about where people go against their own best interest and do something that completely doesn't make sense. I'm sorry?
Thomas Frank.
I'm trying to remember the name of it. Yeah. That was one, and then there was another one that was similar to that too. That was more advertising focused, but it had the same principles. But it really talked about like if you do a sale and you say 1/3 off, as opposed to if you say we'll give you another number, that the public wouldn't do the math. They would respond to what they thought sounded like a better deal rather than what was actually a better deal. So it was a different offshoot book, but I've read those and I've tried to think about those when we do advertising, and I find that it's just too difficult to really figure out like what people are going to do. People are irrational. So if everybody was like Spock on Star Trek, it would make a lot of sense. But because people are not, they act in the very bizarre ways. How many campaigns have you seen? Oh, this is going to be a great campaign. This is going to be great, and it fails. So what I have fallen back on after doing all of that is I do pay attention to the types of commercials. What is it we're trying to do? Because it's a structure. There's a way to tell a story, and those 12 ideas help you tell those stories. They're not identical, but they all hang on those ideas. It's like making a film, 3 acts. There are certain ways that you can do things in order to tell a good story. Okay, so that's one thing. But then what I've done is said I'm not going to worry about the psychology. Instead, what I'm going to do is say, here's the product, and here's what the product does. In some fashion, I'm going to show that. And I'm going to let you decide, is it important to you? And I think that's why the #1 commercial you see on TV is, are you tired of whatever? Constantly having to like pour water into your glass. Wouldn't it be better if it just appeared there and you'd have, but it's that thing, and you'd get two of them for $19.99 if you buy it today. And those are things that I think that those do appeal to the psychology of the people, which is I got to have this because I am tired of that. It's never occurred to me that I'm tired of it, but I'm tired of it. So I try to shy away. I mean, that's a really hard road to go down, is to try to figure out people's psychology. So I don't necessarily use a philosophy, but I do always focus on one thing. We did those commercials for IU about the experiences of the students, like Mark Cuban and Eileen Perez. They did a set of commercials for another campus, and it looked exactly like a healthcare spot. If you took the tagline out at the end, you'd have no idea what it was for, because it looked like everything else. And they thought it was all going to work because of the language that was being used, and it failed. So it's hard to figure out. It was from the same advertising group, so yeah.
So 2 years ago, our local electronics stores were full of 3D TVs, and they're gone. You just put up a little while ago a 360 video. I just came out of a workshop on how to build 360 video, and I'm really not convinced that that's a storytelling addition that we're all going to go for. What's your take?
Well, my take on 3D is that why they ever brought it back was beyond me, because it failed the first time for a population that hungered for that. And it was a big fad, and it went away because, frankly, it's not really enjoyable to sit there with glasses on and watch a film. And I went in by mistake to a Star Wars movie, one of the new ones, and we got there at the wrong time. I went into a 3D version, and it was miserable the whole time. It's like, I don't want to be sitting here with these glasses on. You can't turn next to the person and talk to them, if there's something particularly interesting. So that's my thoughts on 3D. The idea of 4K TVs, the idea of 360-degree, there are uses for it. IU, we we're heavily into 360 virtual reality for sports training. Well, there's a purpose for it. Is that going to be something that goes into gaming? Well, I think that's another avenue for it, but that is not a huge market in comparison to television. But I don't think people are ever going to want to do the Ray Bradbury idea of 4 walls video where they walk inside and they're in the veldt. I just don't ever think that's going to happen. It's too disturbing. And I don't think that it's an enjoyable experience, because all you ever ask yourself when you're in a 3D environment, in a 360 environment, is what's going on behind me. And when you turn around, what's...
You signed up to do one.
I signed up to do a 360-degree film, right? Because that was what was required for that space. They can't show a flat version. We did a flat version of it for people to view. Their idea, again, was to be immersed in it. And then you would go in, and we would use audio in order to cue you where to look. And in my opinion, it was unnecessary. I don't think that it was necessary to be a 360-degree film, but that's what they wanted. Do I believe in it? No, I find that to be, a waste of money, personally. Because of what I said, if you're looking at a 360-degree film, you're only looking at maybe half of it at any one moment. So no, I don't believe in that. And I also don't believe in the Ks, the 4Ks, the 8Ks, the things. I have DPs that come in that work out of Hollywood, and they're like, why do I want a camera that's called a Dragon? It's scary. Why do I want 4K? 2K's fine. Eventually at a certain point, your eye can't see the difference. And it really then becomes marketing. And years ago, when the red cameras were introduced, they were introduced by a bunch of computer guys. And they didn't know anything about filmmaking, and the cameras were terrible to use. But everyone wanted them because of the hype. It's like, oh, these are the best cameras. So you get a lot of that. Now, fortunately, 360, this was a 360 panorama. This was not a 360 all. It was just a panorama. So I don't believe in those gimmicks. I think that the film format has lived for 100 and some years, and it's lived that way because people understand it and like it. They like that idea of being omniscient observers, and I just think that's going to live. I think the other stuff's usually gimmicks. But there are places for it, especially in gaming right now. So we'll see how that lasts, yeah.
I kind of want to go back to Richard's question, because mine was pretty similar, and I'm not quite sure you answered the question. And the way that I want to ask the question is that we think of the industry and the commercial side of what you do as ruthless, and I think you've sort of demonstrated that to us. We also think of it as being driven by fame and fortune, and obviously there's a lot of money involved. And if you're selling products through film, then clearly the outcome is, the success is measured in how much money you make, right? So I guess my question is there any morality in this industry? Is there, in fact, any version of altruism in the industry? And I guess I'm not asking you, well, yes, I am asking you your personal sort of approach to filmmaking. I don't think you're doing this for the money. I don't think you're doing it to make a lot of money for other people. So is there, in fact, a sense of doing good through filmmaking?
No. At its core, no, there's not. No. That's the simple answer. There is very little morality in the business, and for many people it is about the ego and it's about making money. So that's the reality of it. Otherwise, there would not be the Monday morning box office count, which never used to happen. So you don't have those counts if it's not important. You don't have people that are getting fired because they made an art film that tanked. So I'm going to answer it in a very broad, general way, which is no, it's not that kind of an industry. The people that I've worked with in a number of cases are there for one reason only, which is either to make their name or to make money, or to use and get assets to make their film for little or nothing, and give no return, and then leave. So that happens a lot.
So what about...
What about me?
So, okay, that's the commercial side of this.
Commercial and film, feature film. And
okay, what about the educational side of it?
Educational side is a little different. There's still a lot of ego involved in it too. But no, there are, the making of those types of films do typically have a reason for being made. They typically are passion projects. But I would separate those out. Because I'm talking primarily about commercial work and about feature film work or television work. Again, there's a lot of people that you work with that are great, and they do really good work. Most of us, I think, that thrive in the business and stay in the business for this long are people that care about trying to make a good story. Like we are interested in that. We're interested in the process of filmmaking. We're interested in when we're done that this should be something that's interesting to watch, should have a story. So the film that we're going to make next fall is about a young boy, a 15-year-old. It's called A 15-Year-Old Boy's Fever Dream, where he sees everything that you see in the movie is based on his perspective, and he hates his mother, and he's getting involved with a guy that's taking him down the road towards murder, and like it's just all very interesting. But it's a very personal story that's based on a lot of true incidents that have been combined. And he's doing this as a passion project, and his point is, I need to make this film. He needs to make it for his own soul, all right? But we'll wait and see if that's successful or not. And me as a filmmaker, when I'm working for him, is if I'm going to produce this piece, which I'm going to next fall, one of the things I talk about is you're not going to do what other people do. You're not going to come into a town and essentially rape and pillage and then leave. It's not going to happen. We're going to practice that higher level of filmmaking where everyone benefits, and it's more of a social experience than it is it's all about the filmmaker. So there are ways to do that, but I'm answering it in a very general way. The answer is no, you go into it typically with this is not the way it is. It's pretty cutthroat. Getting a commercial job like the one that was today is the Western and Southern Financial Group. Getting that job, there's like 5 companies from all over the country that are trying to get that job, and they will do whatever they can to get that job. They really don't care about that product, all right, at its core, they don't. But there are times when you do have things like, you know, the IU commercials that we worked on, we did that as, it was also a level of passion because the writer was the guy who wrote Hoosiers. So he's from Bloomington, he grew up in Bloomington, and he cared a great deal about it. And it was a passion project. He didn't take his fee, and he'd work on those for 6-8 months with me, and you know, we'd make some good stories. And we were happy with that. But if someone else came to him, like Clemson now wants us to go do commercials for them, we're going to charge them. It turns into a mercenary situation. Did that answer it? Yeah. I got a question right here.
What advice would you have for someone in college that's trying to sort of follow what you're doing?
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is I make sure I get it out there. Raphael knows this is coming. Do not go to film school of any kind, shape, or form. Okay, it's a waste of time and money. Don't go. Okay, unless you intend to be a cinematographer, don't go. If you want to be a cinematographer, you should try to get into AFI because it focuses on being a filmmaker, like as being a director of photography. But don't go get your MFA in cinematography and think that you're going to work. You know, I've had too many friends who did it, and now they're teaching high school history. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not doing what they thought they wanted to do. So that's the first thing. One of the rules I have is if I get someone from the New York University, NYU, undergraduate media program, and they want to work on a film, I say no, I don't want them anywhere near the set. Because they think they know everything, and they don't. So my advice, if you want to follow my path, is I went to a liberal arts college. I took things like art history. I took things like ceramics. I took biology and chemistry, and I hated a lot of the things, but I learned a lot. I took a German course that I flunked, that I wasn't even required to take. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I took it. So do that because those experiences inform who you are later. Okay? You're in college for one reason and one reason only, and that is to learn how to learn. That's it. You're not there to get stuff packed into your head. You're not there to get some particular philosophical direction, but you're there to learn how to learn things. And the more you can do that, then in a business like this, the greater likelihood you will succeed because you have to be interested. I never thought I was going to make a film on the Minuteman missiles, but I learned about that. Tonight I'm talking about World War I. I'm not a historian. I never knew how to direct cavalry in a Civil War piece, but you do it because you say, oh, this is interesting, let me see what I can learn about this. So that's the number one thing. And then the rest of it's really up to you. I broke into a party and handed my resume to someone, and to them that shows them this guy's got, you know, what it takes to get in front of someone and make it happen. And if they're going to do that for themselves, I'll hire that so that they'll do it for me. And so a lot of it's just you personally. I have a lot of students that have come through my classes that I've introduced to people in the business, and they're working in. I show up on set, and there they are. You know, they've been working for 2 years as an art director or whatever, and they're making really good money, and they're doing great work, and they're out of school 2 years. But they have that opportunity because they know they've met people and they've worked. But there are all kinds of ways to get into the business, okay? And one of them that never works is going to school for it. okay? It just doesn't, because you don't go and interview for a job. I want to be a director. It's not going to happen. You become a director over time, and usually you work your way up. Some people go through advertising agencies, and that's where they come out. A lot of big directors, especially in the 80s and 90s, were coming out as from art directors from major creative shops, advertising shops. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. And so it's really difficult to give you specific advice. But it can be done if you want to be in the business, and if you love making, you know, media. In the old days, I used to say if you love making film. If you love making film, you'll make it happen. But it's because you knock on doors and you get yourself in people's way. But one thing I will stress is don't lie. Because I've had too many people telling me that they've done something, and I've gone and looked at their resume, and I just go like, I don't want to deal with this person. Because if they're lying to me, they're not going to represent me very well. And they're lying about things like, I want a Canadian Academy Award for cinematography. And it turns out that they were a production assistant. And they never thought anyone would look at the credits. You know, that kind of thing, yeah.
The development of digital technology, I'm sure, has given you a lot of possibilities and, ways of doing things. I was wondering if there have been any losses or disadvantages through that development.
Yeah, 70 takes as opposed to 7. That's the biggest difference. So when we worked in film, the budget was not time. The budget was not money, the budget was film. So you would have enough money to buy so much film stock, and once that film stock was gone, your film was done, whether you'd shot it or not. So it was a different philosophy back then. You worked really hard to make sure that what you were going to shoot was ready, and then you would shoot it. Now, what I find a lot is I'll do 17, 18 takes of something where you want to blow your brains out, because it's the same thing over and over. But there's no penalty for that. There's no penalty for not being prepared or knowing what you want to do. So because digital technology,
has it had an effect on the product?
Yeah, it's worse, because they don't prepare. Because there is no nothing bad. There are no ramifications for them not being prepared. I have gone on too many scouts in the last 5 years where we walk around and say we're going to shoot these things, where I've had directors saying, well, we could do this or this or this. I don't know. Well, we'll see. And they take a couple pictures and they leave. And I'll say, what are the shots? You know, because I have to set all that stuff up. And they'll say, well, maybe this and this and this. And then we show up the next day and it's nothing like that. And it's because they didn't make a decision. And they didn't make a decision because they didn't want to sit there and think about it and figure it out and work with the cameras, because we take still cameras and we figure out what we're going to shoot. So what's happened is there is no penalty because they're not wasting film. It's time. And then that isn't their fault. The use of time is no longer the director's fault, who was not prepared because he decided not to make a decision, he or she, the day before. It's the crew's fault for not working fast enough. So those are the drawbacks for digital side. Because what we have always said and continue to say is film is harder. Film is harder. When you shoot film, actual film is harder, because you have to know a lot more about what you're doing than you do with digital. Digital gives you a lot of latitude. Now, I won't be all negative, because the good side about digital is it allows you the freedom of experimenting and trying things, okay? But you're asking me about what it's done to the industry, and what it's done to the industry is it's made it very difficult for me to finish a project on time every day, because there is no penalty in terms of budget, because you take your card, you offload it, bring it back, reset it, and you can shoot again so long as you've got the time. So, there is good and bad. But I think that the biggest problem is I'm running into a lot of people. I mean, I have DPs that can't talk to the crew. They don't know how to talk to the crew, because they start on these small projects and they didn't really work their way up. And they're standing at camera and they see a light and they run across the room to the light and they adjust it and they run back to the thing. And meanwhile, we've got crew members that are on every light waiting to be told what to do. And one of them says, if you just tell us what you want, we'll go ahead and do it. It's faster. And then the guy behind the camera goes, no, it's faster if I come over and do it myself. To which the crew member yells back, it isn't really. So there's, those, and it's because he came up in a digital world, this DP. He was very young, and he never learned the craft. And I think that's, so I don't know if that really answered the question directly. Okay, but yeah, some days I cringe about not having film, but having digital gives us a lot of latitude in post-production that you don't have with film. And it gives you, and it also is doing a really nice job of capturing latitudes. So you can get, some stock, or not stock, but some cameras you can get 14 to 16 stops, which is outrageous, to be able to get that kind of latitude. So.
Yeah.
If you have a film project as a writer, and it's in play, and you're just kind of curious about which direction to go for first, would you go with producers, directors, or actors?
Well, you've asked something that's way outside my understanding in the business, unfortunately. I mean, I do get asked that question. I get people that send me notes and say, hey, I saw you worked on such and such, here's a script, how do I get it made, and those types of things. And I mean, I'm really honest with people, I have no idea. I don't even know, I work with a writer, and I don't even know how he gets it made. You know, I mean, I literally don't. It's a very complicated system. You know, you'll hear the standard stuff of get an agent, and the agent will take care of it. I mean, essentially, what I do know is studios won't take things that don't come from lawyers. They will not take something that's unsolicited. But, you know, there's all kinds of stories. I mean, this guy I don't really like is Quentin Tarantino. I don't really like him so much as a director. But, you know, his famous story, if he's working at a video store and he showed the film, the script to Harvey Keitel because he knew which, like, yoga thing or whatever he was in, or AA, I don't know, some meeting, and he passed him the script, and that's how he got in the business. And that was true. I mean, that's how it happened. So you never know is the thing. And I mean, I wish I had advice. I have a lot of people that ask me that, and that's an incredibly difficult part of the business. I mean, the number of writers in Hollywood alone that are not making money is insane. And they're out there, the same questions of who do I show it to? Do I show it to a producer? I mean, if you know a producer, you should show it to him. If you know a director, show it to him and at least solicit advice. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but man, if I ever figured that out, I'd be...
Well, I do. I mean, it's in London right now, and it's in LA, and I know exactly who it's with, the process that it's in. I stepped outside of that box to get a production analysis in Los Angeles from a company, because I think it benefits me as a writer to know if I have a $40 million pick or a $15 million pick or a $110 million pick.
Right. You were trying to get evaluated for what its potential box office was? Is that what you're saying?
I need to know what the budget is on it.
The budget to make it.
To make it.
Oh, well, that's a different...
I think that puts me in...
Yeah, that's different. Then you just hire any line producer. Any line producer can do it. Like
well, there's a company in LA that will do it to you. So the production designer that likes it, that he's sending it to that company, and then they get it back to me. So it benefits me, I'm assuming, as a writer to say, yeah, this is a $43 million pick.
Yeah,
Instead of going,
I have no idea. Right. Right, exactly. I don't know whether that's something that they look at. I mean, really, I've never heard that. Again, I don't know. I'm not qualified to answer this question, really.
You go and do something, once you have a budget, it's going to make a difference as to who you go to, I'm assuming.
Well, let me put it this way. They came to us with this picture, and they said you have a $3 million cap on this feature film. That's all you got. Pictures can be made for anything. Pictures can be made for $177,000. There's only two kinds of pictures that are actually made: the least expensive picture ever made and the most expensive picture ever made. There's no other kind in terms of marketing. Now, for us, we had a feature film. That feature film that we're making for $3 million could easily be $20 or $30 million. It could also be $110 million to make that if they wanted to make it to certain levels. So the film itself can be made really at any level. Armageddon was budgeted at like $80 million, and it cost 120, 130 because the director insisted on spending more and more money. It wasn't necessary for the picture. He just wanted it to look cooler. Okay, so I'm only saying that because no film is in and of itself necessarily this much money. You will produce to what you have, and one of my rules that I was given when I started this business is you do not ever go over budget, but by God, don't ever go under budget. You spend exactly the amount of money that you have available to make the best picture you can, because that's why they gave you the money. So if your picture comes in and someone looked at it and says, well, I can make this for $20 million, and someone else looked at it and said, I can make it for $40 million, that's not necessarily going to sell it. What's going to sell it, in my opinion, is going to be the story. Having that information is great, because you can say, well, I've had different people look at it, and some people said they can make it for this or this or this. But you need to look at it if you're going to be my financer, if you're going to be the picture, and look at it and say, how do you want to do it? You know, and then that'll be the deciding factor, is the people that end up buying it to produce it, the production company, they're going to rebudget it, no matter what you have in your pocket. You can say, I had it budgeted for $12 million. They're going to look at it and say, there's no way I can make it for less than 15, you know, whatever. They're going to have their own opinion. But again, I'm not totally qualified. I can tell you though, if you handed me your script and I budgeted it, I could tell you what it cost with caveats. I can tell you what it cost outside of SAG. I can tell you what it cost outside of DGA. I can tell you like what below the line is going to cost you and take off above the line. All those things can be determined and you can get ballpark figures, and they're very helpful to you. But then they're also based on things like, are we shooting 3 pages a day or 5 pages a day? Those are arbitrary decisions you make based on how much money you have.
Okay.
All right, so if they say we've got $12 million and that's based on 5 pages a day, and they say we got to shoot 7 pages a day, we can't shoot this many days, then now all the numbers get changed. They all get reconfigured in order to fall within the parameters of what they're going to allow us to do.
Okay.
So that I don't mean to be put too fine a point on it, but I'm just saying that that's a very difficult question to answer. Anything else?
That's it.
You're not standing
So,
close
thank
enough
you.
to me.